The next definition, still working in our anchor part of the glossary, is existing wall. This is a sample, a prop. It's an existing wall anchor that I'm using to help illustrate the definition of this term, courtesy of Gulfport Industries. This is their part number FR101F. Now, here's the definition, existing wall anchor. It's known by other names, tube anchor, pipe anchor. I can't think of any other name that it's known by, but existing wall anchor. Here's the definition, a hole preparation, generally in the soffit of the frame of a frame member, with internal reinforcing and or guide for an expansion bolt, machine bolt, or screw used to secure the frame to an existing opening. Yes, it's all of that, but it's something else as well. So let's go through it a little slower. The first part is a hole definition. What is a hole definition? Well, they say generally in the soffit, not always, but generally in the soffit. The soffit is in your frame profile, in your mind's eye. Imagine the profile of the frame. Going from the back side, you've got your, maybe a back bend return. It wouldn't be a back bend return using an anchor like this, but if it was a drywall frame, back bend return. Then the return, typically 1/2 inch, not always. Very commonly 7/16 as well. 2-inch face. Then you've got the rabbet, 1 15/16 generally for 1 3/4 thick doors. 5/8 stop face. And then you've got your soffit. The soffit is the part of the frame that you would screw surface applied gasketing to. But it's also the part of the frame that you're going to create a hole preparation. You're going to drill a hole in the soffit, or you're going to drill a hole and dimple a hole and countersink a hole, depending on the fastener, if it's flathead, in the soffit of the frame, with internal reinforcing and or guide, that's this, for an expansion bolt, a machine bolt, or a screw. Let's stop there. Internal reinforcing, that's the other part of what this is. When you install this, when you snap this into the frame, and you'll notice this is for an unequal frame. I can tell that it's off center. One edge to the center of the hole is about 2 7/8. The other definition is about 2 5/8. Okay, that's because this would be intended for an unequal rabbet frame. If you had an equal rabbet frame, this will give you fits, because this won't reach over far enough, and this will be too far, and you'll have to cut it. Most frames, I think, are unequal rabbet, but not all. Be mindful if you're ordering these anchors, know that you're getting them for equal or unequal rabbet. It's a botheration if you have to try to make this work for an unequal rabbet frame, or for an equal rabbet frame. So it says, I was about to say, when you turn the frame over, after you've drilled your hole, you'll center this over the hole or the dimple that you've created, and you'll rotate it in place. Now this will be sitting in the frame, and you'll weld here and here, and most people don't, but I would weld down here and here as well. They use the term internal reinforcing, and that's this tube. Oh, it's called a tube anchor as well. Pipe, existing wall, obviously. Tube anchor, I may have said that originally. But when you get this in place and you have welded it in place, when you get the frame up in place, and here's the reinforcing part, as you tighten the screw, this is going to prevent the frame from being bowed or crushed in that sort of dimension, that sort of orientation. As you tighten the screw down into the soffit, it's going to make the frame want to spread out. This is going to prevent it from happening. That's the other part of what this does. It's like a sex bolt in the female portion of the sex bolt. You know, it bolts it through, but the actual length of that bolt is meant so that it prevents you from crushing the door skin down when you tighten the, obviously, most commonly the door closer or the exit device, you know, or a mail slot for that matter. So, internal reinforcing, also a guide. They go on to say expansion bolt, machine bolt, or screw. An expansion bolt is going to be a 3/8 sleeve anchor. Whatever length suits your requirements. 4-inch, 5-inch, 6-inch, used in masonry applications. If you're going into cement block, that's going to be troublesome because that block is so brittle. But not to get into talking about that per se, you would run through here an expansion bolt, actually through here, or a machine bolt. You could use a 3/8 16 machine bolt, or a finer thread if you're going to drill and tap that into, say, a steel channel. And then, of course, they say screw. You could use a number 24 flathead wood screw if you're going to take a frame like that and then screw it into a wood buck structure. So any of those fasteners can be run through this. Final line in the definition is used to secure the frame to an existing opening. Absolutely. The frame is generally welded to one piece. Before you do that, you're going to dimple all your holes. You might have a press, a dake press, an arbor press, to give you a nice, with a die set, to give you a nice 3/8 dimple. There's other ways to prep for that as well. And I can immediately think of 3 different ways to do that, in the sense that you're going to have an arbor press that's going to have a die set that's been made just for that type of job. You could then also buy a tool that we happen to sell and other people do as well, where it's basically a die as well. You've drilled a hole and then you're going to put a die underneath the frame, and you're going to take a large crescent wrench and you're going to tighten that down until you create that dimple. The third way is kind of a back shop way, where we would take literally the anchor, put it in place. Well, what we would do is we would drill the 3 or 4 1/8 of an inch or 3/16 of an inch holes in the frame. We would place this behind that hole that we've drilled, go so far as to even weld it in place to keep it in place. And then what we would literally do is take a railroad spike. Think of a railroad spike. Now put the tip of that down onto a grinder. Bring it down to a nice implement. A railroad spike is a great size, and this is on your bench, to be able to take your 2.5 pound mini sledge and hammer that down. You're going to want air protection when you're doing that. With practice, you'll get it dimpled pretty well, and then you'll finish it off with a 3/4 countersink. So that'd be the third way to prep that soffit for this. Now, it doesn't have to only be in the soffit. Your client might say, where the center of the frame is, I know I've got a void there. So what I want you to do is give me the dimples in the rabbets. So you'd make literally a custom pipe anchor, a piece of strap metal. You might take 2 and weld them together, or you might take 2 or 3 and just basically weld them together, cut them to create yourself a custom anchor, or build it in place. Is why you might make a solution for the client, because they have trouble with where this hole would be otherwise located. Speaking of the bolts, we've also taken applications where the client said, I need a 12-inch sleeve anchor. No one makes those. Well, you can take a bunch of sleeve anchors, you can cut and weld and slide the components over and make yourself a custom-like sleeve anchor. We've done that as well, because the client knows that the CMU, the block, pardon me, the cement block, is extremely brittle. You go through that wall, now it's hollow. And the client says, well, I want to get through all of that back to something solid. So we've done that in the past as well. All of it comes back to allowing you to start with an existing wall anchor like this, modifying it to position it where in place you want it. And if you get over maybe 10-inch or 12-inch jam depth, you're going to have 2 pipes, because now there will be 2 preps in the soffit of the frame, because 1 bolt is just simply not enough. 6/8, 7/0, 3 per jam is pretty typical. I always do 4. If it gets taller than that, if it gets wider, we start to consider, if it's wider than 3 foot or certainly 6 foot, talk to the client about, hey, do you want a couple in the header as well? Because you're screwing a frame to something else. The door is going to be solidly hung in the frame, and the frame will be a solid welded one-piece unit. That's all going to be, that will all have great integrity. But now you're just mechanically fastening that assembly to something that's certainly going to be substandard. So in absence of having something absolutely solid to attach to, compensate with additional anchors. And that's why for us, 4 per jam is what we do, because very routinely clients would come to us and say, yeah, I only was able to get 3 of those 4. I'm glad you put 4 on per jam, because I could only hit something solid 3 of the 4 times. So that sort of scenario, a client would say, yeah, I glued in the head of that 4th bolt, and the next guy who pulls it out, he's going to get a surprise when that comes right out. So, compensation when you know that you're not going to have solid application everywhere. If you're drilling and tapping into a steel channel, yeah, most people don't do that, drill and tap, but it's something that is certainly recommended. That would be a very solid way to do it. When it comes to that sort of anchor too, I always would suggest clients learn how to weld, or get a welder, get it in place, Make sure the door is true plumb level and square. After you've shimmed it, tack weld that frame right in place. Another way to do it. So used to secure the frame to an existing wall. That's indeed what this is for. Also prevents you from crushing. Let's switch to the screen view now, and let's just take a closer look at how that might actually look in cross-section. All right, here's that definition, existing wall. That's what it's going to look like. You know, they're showing that attached. You know, this is a generic representation. This plate that's here, that could represent if you're going to line the opening with some steel, I suppose, or maybe something to weld to. But in cross-section, what it's going to look like is going to be okay, that anchor is going to fit here, that flat plate. Your tube is going to generally fit here. You're going to weld here, you're going to weld here, okay? Weld here, weld here. You'll dress these welds, grind them down a little. You don't want any slag build up on the face of the frame. There's no reason for that. Now, then, you've got a little hole that's drilled, and one way or another, you're going to dimple it, however of those three methods that I had said, and you're going to make it look like that. And then your sleeve anchor is literally going to fit, or your machine bolt, you know, or your wood screw, or your machine screw. You get the concept. But when you tighten this, that forces it down. That's going to want the whole frame to crush, splaying out the outside situation. That's why we like to weld everything together. And, you know, very often people who distribute these frames, distributors, they don't weld these anchors in. They just put them in and that's it. And that will work, but I don't recommend that. And the problem with that is it defeats the purpose of preventing this action from happening. Okay, so this is a Gulfport anchor. I happen to have it pulled up here. This is not an ad for Gulfport, but they were quite nice enough to donate many samples to me at no charge so that I could illustrate the, you know, the definition of what we're talking about. Good people over there. Let's wrap up this video on camera. Now, in conclusion, this just happens to be the one for a 5 3/4 frame. As your frame gets smaller or larger, this is going to change the length of the plate. This is representative of what these anchors look like, about 1 3/4 inches. That 5 3/4 is about 5.5 inch overall length. Because those 7/16 returns, you'll basically bend that a little bit to slide it underneath. This won't be butted to the end of the 7/16 return. It will be tucked underneath like that, so there'll be a small amount of bow on it. These anchors are different by different manufacturers. Back in the old days when we distributed Kiwani, it was literally a piece of galvanized steel pipe. It was substantially heavier. The anchor was very inexpensive for what it was made of, but Kiwani made all those anchors themselves. So they were extremely heavy-duty anchors. At the end of the day, this is just half-inch electrical conduit, really, and a piece of steel, so you can make your own. And there are variations on the existing wall anchor, but this would be the one that we would call a pipe anchor, or a tube anchor, or existing wall anchor. The problem is existing wall anchor, I think, is a term that can actually describe different variants of this. You want an anchor that you're going to attach the frame to an existing wall, and the concept is that you're going to bolt it, and that anchor is going to facilitate the bolting of that. Therefore, this is available in different shapes, but this is the most common one. We would call it a pipe anchor because that's what we called it once upon a time, but existing wall anchor. You know, at that point, if you look through a manufacturer's catalog, you'll see variations on these. We dove into the Seco Tech Manual and others in prior definitions, and certainly in future definitions. So be mindful when you're doing this to know exactly what anchor that you're using, perhaps from the perspective of what your client expects to see. But when it comes to an existing wall anchor, I've never had someone say, oh, I didn't like that anchor. That didn't work for me. I will have occasionally some people say, I didn't like that existing wall anchor, which is just really a hat channel that, fits into the back of the frame in a hat sort of section. They'll say, I don't like that one. It doesn't prevent the frame from kind of bowing as I use my 18 horsepower Milwaukee drill to drive that sleeve anchor. And a lot of these guys, anyway, making things extremely clear is always a good thing, because this definition is open to interpretation in the sense of what Steelcraft might mean as an existing wall anchor versus Curry's or Republic. Look in their tech manual, then you'll know what you're dealing with. But that's the bottom line definition. Any questions on an existing wall anchor or how to apply it, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you.